Well, there's bad news for President Cyril Ramaphosa regarding people's faith in him. An Afrobarometer survey found that less than 40% of people trust the president somewhat or a lot. And there's little to no trust in Parliament, the police or their local council. Mikhail Moosa, South African Reconciliation Barometer Project leader, joins me now live from Cape Town. Mikhail, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. Let's break this research down. Let's start with the first citizen. How are people feeling about the president?
Thanks for having me on, Shahan. Yes, so this is one of the key findings from the Afrobarometer Survey, where we asked South Africans across the country in multiple languages in face-to-face interviews in a survey that took place between May and June earlier this year, how they're feeling about the government, about the economy, and their say in public politics as well. And we asked South Africans to evaluate a range of institutions and how much trust that they place in each of these institutions. And of course, one of the key institutions in the country is the executive arm of government. And what we find is that trust in the president is actually very, very low at the moment in 2021, but also that trust in the president has been declining for about the last decade as well. So President Cyril Ramaphosa's trust rating in Afrobarometer is actually slightly higher than President Jacob Zuma's second term, but still very, very low compared to earlier surveys that we've conducted over the last 15 years. So this is quite worrying in terms of the president having a mandate or public approval for a lot of the tough reforms that he's going to have to implement over the next few years in order to recover from the devastating effects of the pandemic.
Yeah, and of course, during a pandemic, the question is whether people still trust and have faith in the health department. How are they feeling in that regard?
Surprisingly, the health department has been quite well received by a lot of South Africans. So I think it's important to sort of preface the fact that this survey was conducted in May and June of this year. So obviously the subsequent scandals relating to the digital vibes allegation, Minister Willem Kiese's resignation, these were not factored into the results that we're seeing. But I think because of the prominence that the Department of Health has had over the last year or so, dealing with the pandemic, ensuring communication with people, having access to treatment facilities and those sorts of things, people have seen the Department of Health perhaps more than other institutions and have evaluated it quite positively. So the Department of Health is actually one of the most trusted institutions in South Africa from the list that we evaluated, only just behind the media and broadcasters, which are trusted by a vast majority of South Africans.
Yeah, interesting. I'm guessing if you did that research a little bit later, you might have found different results regarding the health department. So let's talk about the IEC, because we know we're going into local government elections that could possibly be moved to February, depending on the Constitutional Court. Very interesting findings regarding how South Africans feel about the Electoral Commission.
Yeah, so trust in the Electoral Commission has really declined over the last decade, like many other institutions. And I think this is a very concerning trend for the health and vibrancy of South Africa's democracy. Of course, democracy depends on people believing that it's something worth pursuing. And if people don't have trust in the IEC to ensure free and fair elections, or that they think that the IEC is doing a good job, then I think it affects public confidence in democracy as a whole. So I think an important thing to keep in mind is that the decline in public trust in the IEC is also occurring at the same time that less and less people are registering to vote, less and less people are turning out to vote as well. So one of the major trends of the last few elections has been declining voter turnout. And with our increasingly younger population as well, what we're seeing is less and less people feeling as though elections are a useful means of engaging in politics. So it's really no surprise that we see trust in the IEC has decreased as well. But I think an important thing to sort of keep in mind here is that the IEC will have to somehow build back public trust. So whether that's through increased funding or just better voter education, we really do need people to participate in elections and especially have their say at a local level during times of crisis like we're living through at the moment. So in as much as a lot of people actually supported the postponement of political campaigning because of the current health restrictions we have in place, I think the IEC and many other public institutions, Chapter 9 institutions as well, will need to show that they are acting independently in the best interest of all South Africans to ensure that our democracy is functioning capably and efficiently as well.
Yeah, so while we're talking elections, let's stay with politics. What's it looking there for opposition parties and the ANC?
Yes, so I think, linked to a lot of dissatisfaction with government, we're also seeing that people are becoming less and less, having less and less trust in political parties of both the incumbent party and opposition parties. So whereas about 10 years ago, about 60% of people surveyed in the Afrobarometer survey said that they had quite a high degree of trust in the ruling party, which of course is the ANC, we see that figure coming down from 60% in 2011 all the way down to 27% in 2021. So I think this, really mirrors the decline of the ANC's vote share at elections, but also a huge sense of dissatisfaction with the governing party as a whole. But the interesting thing is, of course, when people lose trust in the ruling party, they similarly don't seem to have much more trust in opposition parties. So I think what we're seeing is perhaps slightly counterintuitive, is that people have less and less trust in the ANC, but that trust is not going to other opposition parties. So it speaks to a sort of crisis in our political party system, where people think that both the ruling party is inefficient or unable to be trusted, but equally, there are not sufficient attractive or trustworthy alternatives among opposition parties as well. So what we're seeing is people disengaging from politics as a whole more and more. And this is leading to sort of levels of despondency that we're seeing, all across society as well. So I think these results as a whole speak to some of the crises that we've seen erupting this year, where local leaders and institutions just simply don't have the capital to speak to people's needs and be able to communicate effectively as to why we should act in a particular way. Citizens in the state, there's just a distinct lack of trust. And this is, manifesting in many different ways, as we've seen over the last few weeks and months in many different parts of the country as well.
Yeah, I'm very interested to know what the survey shows regarding the public protector, because I want to know what happened when Thuli Madonsela was in the public protector's office versus Busisiwe Mkhwebane, who has lots of controversies through the courts.
Sure, yes. So, this is also one of the advantages of doing the survey, is we ask South Africans how they evaluate Chapter 9 institutions like the public protector as well. So I think it's important to consider the results in the fact that almost all institutions experienced a decline in trust over the last decade. But what's really quite impressive about the public opinion on the public protector is that between 2011 and 2015, actually more people had quite a lot of trust in the public protector during this period. So this was obviously referring to former public protector Thuli Madonsela and her reports on the Nkandla scandal as well. So people really saw her as an important institution, representing an important institution which was fighting back against corruption, which was willing to speak out against the president, which was willing to be unpopular if it meant representing the interests of the public. So, of course, her term ended in 2016, and she was replaced by Busisiwe Mkhwebane, who has, of course, had her legal troubles and has had many disagreements with various political entities. And what we've seen is that trust in the public protector has really declined since 2015, so since the end of Thuli Madonsela's term in office. And that trust in the public protector now is much lower than it used to be about a decade ago, or even as recently as 2015. So it seems as though that more people have less trust in the oversight institutions which are supposed to serve the public and represent public interest. So I think it also speaks to a broader trend where people are seeing corruption more and more. The Zondo Commission, of course, is a good place for airing out a lot of these concerns, but corruption is just in the news so prevalently. And what we're seeing is that oversight institutions are not being trusted by South Africans to be able to ensure accountability, to ensure that those who are involved in these activities are brought to book as well, and that also her legal challenges are somehow affecting her credibility as a legal guardian of the public interest.
Yeah, and let's move away from Chapter 9, because I actually should have asked you about the trust in police and the army. I know you did this before the riots that took place in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, but what was it looking like even before that?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting aspect to look at, especially in the context of the riots as well. But what we find is that trust in the police, in the South African police service, is actually very, very low. And linked to this, we have other findings which will be released in the next few weeks about instances of corruption. So we ask South Africans, which individuals do you think are involved in corruption and how often? And what we actually find is that many South Africans believe that the police are amongst the most corrupt officials in any form of public service. So I think the link between corruption and trust is quite a close one. And it also speaks to how corruption occurs at quite a local level, as opposed to the grander, higher state capture level of what people hear and talk a lot about. People's experience with the police really affects their trust as well. So I think low levels of trust in the police is not something that should surprise a lot of us, especially when we hear about the way that the police interact with local communities, their use of force. We know that IPID is very busy in investigating loads of discrepancies and violations that the police regularly commit as well. And also when we look at it in the context of the riots, people just didn't respect the authority of the police. The police didn't have the capacity to manage situations. There was a distinct lack of trust between the police and the constituency that they're supposed to serve. So I think that's a sort of really unsurprising finding, but certainly one that's very worrying. Another interesting finding is the public's trust in the army. So the army tends to fare much better than the police. One would imagine perhaps because they see less of the army, but only in emergency situations is the army called in, and they tend to be quite effective when they are deployed. But nonetheless, what we're also seeing is that less and less people are trusting these institutions, these security institutions, as they were a few years ago. So in as much as the army does fare better than the police, even trust in the security institutions, officials who are supposed to have our interests, to look after us, to ensure safety and the rule of law, even these officials are becoming less and less trusted by South Africans. So in the context of the riots as well, we see that there's a sort of distinct lack of trust, not only between people and their leaders, but even in the institutions and officials who are supposed to secure law and order, which is why lawlessness was allowed to continue just for so many days consecutively in some areas as well.
Yeah. Lastly, I think it's important to find out how many people were actually surveyed and if that is a good representation of South Africa.
Sure, yes. So our survey was conducted face-to-face surveys. We believe face-to-face surveys are the best method of collecting this sort of public opinion data. We go around to all 9 provinces. We ask our questionnaire in multiple languages as well to ensure we're reaching a good spread of people. The total sample that we used is 1,600 people, so it might sound quite small, but when you are doing these sorts of surveys, there's really no need for you to ask every single person like a census does. So almost all these surveys are based off a sample. And the sample that we use uses the latest population estimates from Statistics South Africa. So we ensure that the sample is nationally representative to a very high degree. So we talk to more women than men. We talk to people in urban areas more than rural areas. And based off population statistics in each of the provinces, we make sure our sample represents that to a very high degree. So we're very confident that our sample is nationally representative. Afrobarometer has been conducting surveys in South Africa for over 20 years, and it conducts surveys in over 30 African countries as well. So it's a sample of 1,600 adult South African citizens, which sounds small, but it is nationally representative of the broader population in South Africa.
All right. Thanks so much for the insight. Appreciate it. Mikhail Moosa from the South African Reconciliation Barometer Project.